Ladies and gentlemen, please silence your phones and hush your babies. The show is about to start. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are tuning in from. The Brit Vengers are back. It's been a while since we've all been together, but the Brit Vengers are, well, most of us are back. We've got a lovely little panel here to discuss how one woman changed the Mormon Church. That woman is Sara Delaney. She will be joining us tonight, and we'll be talking about her efforts and the efforts of all of us as a combined group to change the church's safeguarding policy in the UK, and how not only was it successful, but it was actually met surprisingly well. So to talk through those challenges, everyone, we have Peter Bleakley, Sara Delaney, Jane Christie. Welcome, everyone. Say hi.
Hello.
Hey. We've also got people in the comments, which is great. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. That is here. It's good to see the usuals. Tim Rathbone, Diamond Dave, Alan Zabriskie. Some names we all recognize by this point. Hello, 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 everyone. Sel is in the chat also. Love to see it. So, welcome. Jane, you're Sara's friend. Why don't you start off and maybe tell us what you'd like to get from tonight's conversation?
Okay.
You're her friend too.
Well,
I'll bring you in a moment, Peter. All right?
Well, see, Sara and I are more than just friends. Sara's the love of my life. We have an understanding.
The rumours are true, everyone. The rumours are true.
We have an understanding. Sara didn't just change the Mormon Church. She changed me in so many different ways too. I knew nothing about safeguarding at all until Sara came into my life, and we were all at a Sunstone one year, and we hadn't been podcasting for an incredibly long amount of time, a matter of maybe months or something, I think. It was 21st Century Saints. Obviously, you guys had been going for a bit longer. And Sara meets us and is like, safeguarding, this is why it's really important. And we're like, yeah, we're going to do some episodes about that, the subject of abuse in the LDS Church, and she's like, okay, so we need to do this. We need to talk about this. I've already done, and she gives me this list of things that she's got going on, and I'm like, whoa. Everything that I know about safeguarding is because I've listened to Sara. She is the most incredibly knowledgeable person. What I want to get from tonight, I want people to know the real story about what's went on behind the scenes, because Sara's had to stay silent for really good reasons up until this point. And just in the past couple of weeks, she can fill you in about why this is, but she's no longer having to stay just as circumspect as she has been. I'm looking forward to her being able to tell her story and the story of what's been going on, and it is a lot. It's very, very salacious in places.
But if we were to give you that now, then you wouldn't stay for the rest of the episode, would you? So, no. Peter, please tell us what you would like to get from this evening. You have... No, I'm not going to time you.
Yeah. Well, 46 years ago, Sara joined the church, and now she's leaving. And this is another, really bad loss.
You hadn't mentioned she was leaving, but fine.
Oh, she's already spilled on that one in 21st Century Saints, Nemo. But for me, sort of my perspective is always, why is it people who have devoted a lifetime to this church still they reach a point where they can't do it anymore? It's too much, or they have to put up some boundaries. So I'm interested to find out how that decision was made and what kind of tipped it over the edge eventually. So that'll be part of my interest in what we'll find out this evening.
Okay, well, before we get into all that, Sara, I'm going to need you to explain some things to the audience. I'm going to need you to explain what safeguarding is, which is a term that we find our American friends don't always understand, and then what your background is and why you're qualified to talk on this subject at all. Unmute yourself to do so, please.
Oh, because it helped me unmute myself. Okay, yeah, thanks, Nemo. I think safeguarding, we can really sum it up as it's policies, practices, procedures that keep the most vulnerable people safe from harm and abuse. It's often about children, about adults that need additional support in every area of their life, maybe physical and mental disabilities. It's about the most vulnerable children in this society. It's about those young people. It's about people that might be refugees, anybody that is at risk of harm and abuse. And safeguarding is, what do we need to know to keep those people safe? What should be put in place to keep those people safe? And how do we ensure that that is happening? And how do we monitor the quality of it? And how do we respond to abuse? How do we prevent abuse? How do we minimise the risk of abuse? And how do we respond appropriately to victims and the risk of harm that offenders may pose? That really kind of sums up what we need to do around safeguarding.
And what's your background? What's your...
My background is I worked for many years for a rape crisis group, and this was back in the early 1980s when rape crisis groups were first getting off the ground, and they were real grassroots activists, at that time very feminist movements. And it was women saying, hey, hang on a minute, everybody. This is happening to women, it's happening to children. Let's start talking about it in society. Let's start looking at what we can do, how we can minimise risk, raise awareness. And so we were doing a lot of that grassroots activism and supporting women that were coming forward needing help, sometimes to report sexual crime to the police, sometimes support going to court, going for medical support. So we were kind of supporting women in whatever way we could, as well as raising awareness. And from that, I became particularly interested in the fact that if we don't start working more effectively with the people that are causing harm in many different ways, they were going to continue causing harm. And we needed to understand why that was happening, what were the factors behind it, and what could we do to minimise that. So I became interested in kind of working in that field, and I did a degree in psychology and qualified as probation officer, social worker. And in the UK, back in that day, the training for probation officers and social workers was the same. It's now separate training, but back in the day, you were qualified as both. And I then worked for probably 25, 30 years in various agencies with sexual offending. So I worked for the NSPCC, which is the largest children's charity in the UK, National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children. I worked for local authority safeguarding teams, probation service, delivering Home Office accredited programmes of intervention with adult sexual offenders, and worked significantly with children and young people where there'd been sexual harm and abuse, and also children and young people where their behaviour was problematic. So all of that gave me kind of a bit of a good insight into the issues around abuse and the level of harm that abuse was causing, and a unique insight into how sexual offenders groom and operate, and how they would so often target churches. And certainly the independent inquiry that was held in this country a few years ago identified that 11% of all abuse on under 18-year-olds taking place outside the family home in an institution or another location is happening in faith communities. And so
Can you just repeat that statistic for everyone?
11% of all abuse that takes place outside of the home in institutions and organisations takes place within faith communities. So a significant need for churches to become much more aware of the potential risks that their very unique loveliness actually pose, as well as the strengths that they could bring to play to support victims and to help manage the risk offenders posed. So I became really concerned about that and started trying to talk to church leaders about this problem, and just kept getting met with, the priesthood have got this all in hand. If anything needs to change, the prophet will tell us. You just need to trust the church and trust the process. No, your advice and support isn't needed. The priesthood will handle it. And I was thinking, but the priesthood aren't handling anything. They're not doing anything. We've got serious problems. And then that's really how we came up to deciding that the only way that conversations weren't getting us anywhere, requests to speak to the church safeguarding lead wasn't getting us anywhere. They wouldn't even tell us who he was, never mind let us have a conversation with him. So we decided that the only thing that we could do that would enable us to have any confidence that things might improve around safeguarding within the church was to start talking about this and using the podcast as a means of raising awareness and discussion. And what happens the minute you talk about abuse,
Mhm.
as soon as you talk about abuse, people start coming to you to talk to you about their experiences.
Can we just hold you there for a second there, Sarah? Because I just want to bring Jane in.
Yeah, there's
Jane.
something I think quite significant. I know that Sarah has talked about this before. Sorry, Nemo, I'm sort of jumping in, but it's to sort of prompt Sarah with a question. Would you be up for telling the audience about your history in your ward, being as qualified as you were? You were the expert in safeguarding when there was a situation. Would you be okay to share that?
Yeah, I had a couple of experiences at church. One of them was within my ward quite a number of years ago. So certainly not current bishop, certainly not even bishop before that, but some time ago in our ward, where there was concerns around a family with several children in the ward, and there'd been lots of discussions and people worrying about these children for a while. And then I was asked if I would go and join the bishop and Relief Society president and a couple of other people in the bishop's office having a discussion about their worries about this family. And so when I went into room, I just said, look, I just need to be really clear with you that if you are about to talk about suspicions around abuse or neglect, then I said, you need to know that if I feel it's appropriate, I said, I will be making a referral to children's services and appropriate authorities to make sure that this family is supported and the children are safe. And at that moment, you can just crystallize everywhere position the church is at with safeguarding. At that moment, I was asked to leave the room and not participate in the meeting. It's like, we don't need you. Can you just leave? And it just opened up that absolute chasm for me that, you know what, this is where we're at. I'm saying to you, I can help you, I can support you, but I'm absolutely going to make sure this is reported if it needs to be. And the result I got was, can you get out of my office, please, and go? We don't want you anymore.
So that is a very standard response, I would imagine. That's not uncommon. When someone in the church, we know the church is a particularly hierarchical system and that people don't like people speaking out of turn, right?
But I think it's very worrying that they actually, it's quite clear, like, oh, we don't want to risk you might go and report this. We want to have a conversation that's a little bit secret, and we want to be in control of the narrative, and we want to be in control of what happens with its information, and we don't want to risk you going and taking this anywhere. So actually, you go away because we don't want you in this meeting.
So can I just draw Peter in for a second on that? Because Peter, as a school teacher, your experience would be in an institution, if this sort of conversation was happening, what would be done within the school environment?
Well, for a start, everyone has annual training. All the staff, every adult in the building gets annual safeguarding training, and it's not regarded necessarily as quite as intense as it could be, but it's a massive step up above what's normal in the LDS Church. And you know how to handle a disclosure and a conversation. You have guidance about what you can and cannot say or promise to a victim. You have a whole hierarchy of line managers that you know who they are. We literally have their names and faces on the wall in pretty much every classroom. These are the safeguarding officers. And we're also told that if once we've referred something to them, if we feel that it has not been dealt with appropriately, we can go to someone higher up the ranks, all the way up to kind of a county ombudsperson outside the school. So I think part of the journey that the church is on and has been on, and what Sarah's described, is we've gone from we have a completely amateur clergy. Until recently, they had zero training of any kind in counselling or how to handle these kinds of situations. There are a few policies, but and I think the whole of society since the 1980s has been on a big journey, to get better at safeguarding. But tragically, the LDS Church has dragged very far behind the centre of gravity of that in churches and other institutions, with a huge catch up to do. But I think where you've got amateur people who will have just heard random things demonizing the psychology profession in a religious context, fear of counselors and therapists because they assume that they will be hostile to religion, and therefore if anyone gets referred to them, they'll just be kind of told to blame their religion for the problems, when in fact professional therapists know to work within people's paradigms and not go there. But we were all grew up with this idea that the systems of government, of policing, of law, of psychology, of counselling and therapy are all against us, and will just regard religious people as cuckoo and talk us out of belief. So in an atmosphere of persecution and paranoia, and I think also the burden that every experienced priesthood leader carries is they must know so much of the systems they ran and the kind of interviews and probing worthiness interviews and the cases of abuse and dysfunction that end up in their office that they for decades have been expected to have the magic answers to be able to fix. Means they know there is a graveyard full of skeletons in there and the churches and their state's closet.
Right. So I'm just going to grab you there for a second, Peter.
As soon as some external scrutiny happens, all hell could break loose. You can understand the fear because this is where for so long.
This is where we see the difference between what happens in a school, so your professional environment, where there is an external source to which they can turn, and we see in the church, which is they want to remove someone like Sara, who they are then viewing as that external source of information because she's coming at this from a professional perspective. She's trying to offer professional advice, and they're removing her from the conversation because that's out of turn. And what they want to do is they want to keep it in-house, and they want to say, right, well, we need to consult our in-group to work out what's going on. Jane, you had a thought?
Yeah, it's just to summarize for the American audience. Okay, so if someone reports, if a child or anyone else makes a disclosure of abuse within a school, and this would be across Scotland, England, Ireland, Wales, the job of the person who takes that report is to immediately prioritise that report. That needs to be written down. That needs to exactly what was said, when was said, any other sort of salient points of information, checking the child is safe, is there any immediate risk, and immediately that report goes into the hands of people who are professionally trained to then proceed. Now, what doesn't happen is that person doesn't investigate. It's not their job. That person's job isn't to then start asking more questions, to start, isn't going to have to be in the intimidating position of trying to be the person who investigates the abuse. You've been the safe person, that disclosure has been made, you now have to send that to be reported. And that would be across most institutions, most organisations. That would be sort of the standard that would be expected. And when that happens within the church, if there's a concern or a disclosure that's made, immediately in that instance, there was a bunch of people in that room. That wasn't just a bishop, a stake president, there's a few others in there. So significant numbers in the ward already know about that. Someone else has been called in as an expert because she has a background, but as you say, it's about controlling that narrative. So the church has this expectation, I think, in addition to the controlling the narrative, that we do not, we do investigate. We want to know if this has merit. We want to know if we should be taking it further. And the only instruction that's currently received is insufficient, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to bring Sara in here.
I think we've got what we can see is there's systemic problems within the church. It starts with the fact that leaders, stake presidents, bishops, senior leadership are not adequately trained in safeguarding. They get minimal training. They're thrown into these roles as bishops, as stake presidents, and then they're left to deal with people that have been victims of abuse, people with mental health problems, people experiencing discrimination, struggling with all kinds of issues, abuse, everything in their lives, and they're just chucked in at the deep end to deal with it, with the church not giving them adequate preparation and training. And that adds to a systemic problem, because you've got people that work as a plumber, a mechanic, a salesman all week, and then when they suddenly turn on and put their church hat on, they're supposed to know how to respond to a victim of abuse when they might never have heard about abuse in their life, and they don't know what to do. And they're struggling, and then we all get quite cross with them because they don't know what to do, and they make things worse. And then they simply follow the playbook of the church and do exactly what the church want them to do, which makes things worse. And I've just been pondering whether to share an experience when I was still working. And the only reason I was pondering is I wouldn't guarantee this is going to be 100% non-identifiable, although I think it pretty much is. But if some years ago, and I was still working, and I think I'm probably going back 10, probably 10 years, when I was still working within this field, and I was managing services in a kind of very large city around children and young people that were displaying really dangerous, harmful sexual behaviour. They'd committed very serious offences, rape, really serious offences. And I found out that a young person who was 17 years old, who'd got 12 previous convictions against adult women, had started being taught by missionaries from our church. And I was talking to his case manager, who was really concerned about this. And she sort of said, I don't really know anything about your church, but I know it's a church you go to. What is this all about? What does this mean? He's being taught by missionaries. So we had some discussions, and because this young person was open to what was called the Multi-Agency Public Protection Panel, which is a panel made up of senior police officers, children's services, health, education, representatives that manages the highest risk offenders in the community in the United Kingdom. He was being discussed regularly at that panel. So we went back to that panel and said, we need permission to disclose to the church the risk he may pose. And then somebody came up with a very bright idea that, yeah, we absolutely need to talk to the church because he is a risk to adult women. And seeing as you're a member of the church, it would be best if you have that discussion because they're bound to listen to you. And my heart, I can honestly tell you, my heart sank because I thought, I know they're not going to listen. I know we're going to have trouble with this. And this is really going to be embarrassing from a church point of view, as well as from a professional perspective. And so I started trying to have a discussion with the mission president, it was absolutely ridiculous conversations. We had quite a few conversations. And he said, well, he told me he's only had one previous conviction. And I said, well, I'm a professional working with him with the Multi-Agency Public Protection Panel. And I can tell you there are all of these convictions. And this is a risk he poses to adult women. And you have got sister missionaries teaching him. This is really unsafe. The mission president was really, and I'm just going to name it for what it was. He was uncooperative. He didn't believe it. He said, well, I have to believe what he tells me. So we had a really quite difficult discussion about, well, what does that mean when you're actually refusing to listen to what professionals are telling you about a potential risk in your church? And if anybody wants to get funny about this, the evidence is there. The evidence is there in professional files all over the place, and it will be there in the mission record files if it was recorded properly. Now, this conversation went on with us saying to mission president, well, can you please tell us if anything changes, if he starts attending church any more than just on a Sunday, if anything else is happening, we need to keep an eye on this. And you really need to switch this. So he's being taught by elders. He's not left alone with adult women. He's supervised. And as I say, it was very difficult. The point at which the mission president suddenly took it seriously and started pleading for my help was the point at which I got a phone call from this lad's probation officer to say that he'd been arrested for a further sexual offence. The day after being arrested for this sexual offence, he was baptised. The day after that, he was arrested. And he then told his probation officer he was going to ask the missionaries to go to court and speak to his character, to say he joined the church and everything was going to be different and he'd completely changed. That was the point at which all of a sudden the church said, we don't want our missionaries being called into court to speak to character witness to anybody. That can't happen. And that was the point at which they took it seriously. Not that they were concerned about the risk to their members, not that they were concerned about working with professionals to come up with a plan to keep everybody safe, but they were suddenly concerned about the reputation. What does this mean for the church if our missionaries are asked to speak in court about the character of somebody who we baptised the day after he committed a sexual offence, when you'd already told us he committed 12 sexual offences and we didn't believe you because he told us he committed one offence? And I think that just sums up some of the struggles. I mean, there's other situations, the professional I came across at this church as well, but that sums up the kind of problems that we have in the church of people not feeling confident enough to work with professionals outside of the church and to prioritize that and that information over and above what somebody is telling them.
Okay. Jane, can I bring you in here to talk about then the beginnings of advocating for background checks then? Because we can clearly see through some of what Sara's talking about, we can see the issues at play here, where the church is not interacting well with external bodies, and we're trained within the church to want to have things brought to us by the proper channels through the in-group. We don't really respond very well to stuff coming from the outside. But the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse seemed to be a bit of a catalyst, where the church was brought in, Andrew Ford was brought in to speak on the church's behalf, say some things to the inquiry, because as Sara points out, 11% of non-familial abuse occurs within religious communities. So talk to us about the beginnings of advocating for background checks, please.
Okay, first of all, we have to explain who poor Andrew Ford is for anyone who hasn't.
But we don't want to give him too much airtime, so.
Absolutely. Andrew Ford is the individual who mans the church helpline, the church abuse helpline. Anytime abuse is reported in the UK, they call this person. In the US, it's Curtin McConkie. In the UK and British Isles, it's this one individual and his legal company. So in that capacity, he was the person who is effectively the fall guy for the church, I suppose. He's the person who makes these official reports about what the church is doing. Okay, so I have this incredible friend who has all of this knowledge and all of these ideas, who has motivated us to remind us that actually we have an incredible amount of power with our voices. Sara has taken the lead. She has met with MPs. She has met with her local representatives, her local elected representatives, and was in the process of meeting with national representatives, was working with lots of external organisations, was bringing me up to speed with what I needed to know. We then began sort of formally campaigning. These ideas that were shaped by Sara were all taken from the national inquiry on child sexual abuse. That inquiry received testimony from survivors, people who have experienced abuse, and all of the recommendations that they have made, we shaped into what we were going to ask the church to do. One of the most simple things was the request for background checks, criminal background checks, and so that was in a list of things that we wanted to do. Probably to talk about how we address that, it's perhaps best to hand over to Sara. But what we did certainly was we kicked the ball off. We looked for a bit of support from our mates in the Brit Vengers, and yeah, we got to work. Sara, what did you think that looked like?
Yeah, a really good description, Jane. We started off by writing a letter to our stake presidents and our bishops, and asking everyone else, our friends and people around us, to write letters as well, with a letter saying, this is why we need background checks, this is why we need to improve safeguarding in the church, these are some examples of things that have happened that have been appallingly catastrophic that could have been avoided, and this is how you go about doing these simple changes that will make a significant difference. We also spoke to members of Parliament to let our local MPs know that we were concerned and that we felt it was time there was government oversight around what's happening in religious communities, and that they should not continue to be exempt from the same expectations that are beholden upon other groups and agencies. We used the podcast to actually launch this and to get people talking about this and to try and promote conversations and discussions. And then we were able to meet with our stake presidents, our bishops, and say, look, this is what we want, this is why. No,
Yeah, kind
this
of.
is where
I would say kind of to that one. Sarah, do you want to annoy Nemo by doing a little bit of back and forward, and let's see how quickly his camera fingers can go? Right, let's do it this way, because yeah, we did those things, right? But we also our stake president, some wanted to meet with us, some didn't. Bishops were a little bit freaked out, and there was a sort of general sense of okay, and there's definitely nervousness about how we were going to do it. There was more concern from the bishops, I think, and stake presidents, that we were going to take anything that they had said and use it in a podcast. Now, you, Sarah, you had just said at the start of the example that you gave about you were going to try and not use any identifying information. We have become expert in not using any identifying information. But it's something that's always on our mind, which is why you sort of reminded us of that. We did an open letter. We asked a petition. Nemo had done his petition about tithing. We thought we'd jump on the bandwagon. So there was a petition people could sign to ask for DBS checks. There was also the open letter, and we figured if we could get all of the podcasters who are working in this space, not just Brit Vengers, we were a bit of a mix of active. I was active in the church. Nemo was active in the church. Peter, you were just on the cusp of being bounced out of the church. Sara was active in the church. We all wanted to be there and to make a difference. So we were predominantly edgy Mormon podcasters. We reached across to to John Delaney, Radio Free Mormon, Bill Reel, Natasha Helfer, Lindsay Hansen Park, pretty much anyone you could think of who was podcasting in that space. Everyone was agreeing to use their logo on the open letter. And I think from there then, Sarah, what we decided to do is, okay, the church have got no idea what they're talking about. How about we do a presentation? And just as this was happening, we were asked to talk about abuse in the Mormon Church to a national charity. There was a sort of national conference that was happening.
Yeah.
So we had this opportunity where we were being asked by people who are active in the industry, who are keeping people safe in the industry, to share professional knowledge. Sara gets asked to do consultancy work all the time. She's badass. So we said yes, and we thought, you know what, let's put together what we're going to say, and we'll tell the church before we do it. We'll present this to them, and this will be a really good opportunity so that they can see what we plan to say, and that might motivate them to want to take a bit of action. Right, do you want to fill them in how that went?
Yeah, I think it's
before we jump there for a second. I want to point out that in this timeline also was the letter that was sent to all the bishops.
Yeah.
Not quite yet. No, you hold your horses, little one. Hold your horses.
I need to use that to bring Peter in, because I think he's about to explode because he hasn't spoken. So I'm going to bring Peter in before we then go to the presentation that was given to the charity. And the way the church were very keen that it be understood you don't speak for the church. Right, Peter?
Yes.
Yeah, I know it's Halloween. No one needs to see my head exploding. I just want to sort of point out a couple of other contextual things along the way here. Part of what fired us up was that Andrew Ford kind of made this official statement on behalf of the church to the National Inquiry about abuse in LDS settings. We already were in a context of the church being absolutely delusional about its safeguarding procedures. It had an official blurb that it would give out from its newsroom talking about the church having a gold standard. Nonsense like saying that church members come from close-knit communities, therefore everyone's safe because who would harm the people they know, when the first thing you learn about child abuse is most of it happens in the home with relatives and friends you know. So we're in this context of the church literally delusional, there's no other word for it, in such denial about the nature of abuse, completely just making up PR nonsense rather than dealing with the reality. And that in his report, Andrew Ford said to the nation, to this official national government inquiry, that the number of abuse cases he had handled as the helpline lawyer person, in a sense could be confirmed, was microscopically small. and kind of the implication being there's no problem here. The LDS Church
He
is
didn't
fine.
say
We
it
are
was
not
small.
like
The
the
number
Catholic
he gave, we looked at and went,
is
that's way
small.
too small.
And
He
what was,
said it-
do you guys
it
remember
was-
the number? What was the number?
He-
Was it like 15 over a decade
No,
or
it was
something
16
like that?
cases in 10. 16 cases in 10 years.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
it was
16
But
cases
he
in 10
actually
years.
didn't back that up with what that was actually
No.
referring to. He didn't back that up.
Yeah.
He just said 16
And
cases in 10 years.
we,
Thinking, no.
yeah. And if you talk to anyone in the church, you know there's that many cases in 5 years in 2 stakes that people even know about.
Well, we knew of
So
more
it
than
was
that, Peter.
it
We knew
yeah.
of more than
Well,
that.
it just, of course. I mean, it's everyone knows that. So the idea that our representative lawyer was basically massively underreporting to a national inquiry the scale of abuse that just we know about from cases we've been around in our local areas, was
Nemo, you're
such.
muted.
Right, we're going to have to step in here. Okay,
Yeah.
so what we can't say is that he was underreporting. What we can say is the number he was reporting was not representative of what we understood to be the landscape anecdotally within the church, right? So
Right.
it may be that that was the only number of reports that he had received, and that's what he's giving across. We can't say. All we can say is that the system is not showing. If that is the case, then the system is not adequately bringing to the attention of the church the number of cases that are going on that we understand to be going on anecdotally.
I think, can I say? I think what we need to. I think what we need to say in light of that as well is it doesn't take account of the massive underreporting that is found within any religious community, particularly patriarchal religious communities, where underreporting of abuse is even greater than it is in the general society. And we know that in society as a whole, 1 in 4 people will experience some form of sexual abuse or harm whilst they're under the age of 18. So if you think of 1 in 4 in the general society, there's significant barriers to reporting abuse within religious communities, then what we would say is we can't say that those figures are wrong. What we would say, what we've always said about that is that we really struggle to understand how those figures are representative of some of the information that we kind of know about with people that have spoken to us. We struggle to understand what those figures were based on. And it would be really useful to understand how those figures, to see the transparency around those figures, what, you know, because if there's total transparency, it might put a different light on it.
Yeah. Right, I'm going to bring Peter back in.
Oh, sorry, on you go. Sorry, Peter.
Yeah.
So I just want to, in a sense, mention a sort of a parallel journey that it's not just Sara and it's not just us having these concerns. And something really interesting happened in my stake. I'm in Canterbury stake in the southeast of England, and a similar scenario had occurred that we have members of our congregations who are professionals. We get in all kinds of youth work, in schools, in lots of settings where we get top class safeguarding training in our professional environments. And yet we're coming to church and being the leaders even of wards and congregations and on the leading councils, knowing how safeguarding should be and practicing it in our workplace, but totally ignoring it or making excuses for not having anything close to that robust system within the church. But a lot of people were concerned. So specifically what happened in my stake, which helped to get the ball rolling. So I really want people to understand we're not saying this is all a Sara on her own thing that happened. It's the inspiration here is several, not millions, but a few enough people stepped up in their own areas of influence to start raising these concerns. And we had a sister who I had a good chat with once, who's a remarkable woman. She was a co-founder of a fostering agency. I mean, you can't get more safeguarding aware than that. And she, for years, was raising these concerns with the state leadership, as were a couple of others in similar roles. And we had a new kind of leadership team in our stake, and they, I think, somewhat intentionally also shared this concern. And she was appointed as the State Relief Society president, and other people were appointed to the High Council. So in effect, the team of people have been raising these concerns for a long time. And in recent years, we'd had a High Councillor charged with child abuse, and the bishop of my congregation, while serving as bishop, was arrested and imprisoned for child pornography offences. So this was enough to kind of ring alarm bells that something has got to change
Right.
here.
I'm going to wrap
So
this
they
up
were
then there,
promoted,
Peter, for a second.
and with support locally, we
Peter,
actually
I'm going to have to grab
initiated
this.
a safeguarding program.
I'm gonna have to catch you there for a second, Peter. So I think the broader point here is that the membership of the church, at a broader level, were aware that this is a problem. This is something that needs addressing. It wasn't just Sara that spotted this, and that what we wanted to do and what was effective was creating conversations. Because what you've got is you've got Canterbury Stake knowing this is a problem. You've got Chorley Stake knowing this is a problem. You've got Leicester Stake over here knowing this is a problem. But they weren't talking about it, and they certainly weren't talking about it to each other.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways that we engendered those conversations was to get leaders and stake presidents talking about it, and stake presidents going, well, did you get this email from so-and-so? Yeah, I got it. They were talking about this concern. Yeah, I got that. And then all of a sudden you get this broader conversation. I think that was part of what caused this change. Jane, I'm just going to bring you in.
Yeah, I think there's significantly more. And Sara, it's literally so that I can bring you into this, and it's dragging her kicking and screaming, because Sara hates talking about herself, and she hates talking about the impact that she's had. You know, the title of that, I'm getting my dander up here, you see, the title of this, How One Woman Changed the Mormon Church. Okay, so yeah, everybody knows there are issues in the church. Some people bury their heads in the sand and don't really want to think about them too hard, but everybody knows the scale of it. No, everybody doesn't know the scale of it, unless you're at a certain sort of leadership position. No, you don't. The reason why we have anecdotal evidence, which is what that is you sort of hear stuff going on, and then you can extrapolate from that. Sara was working in this area. As soon as we start talking about abuse, people start talking to us about it. Sara had the background and the experience. We also were getting support from national organisations who were supporting us as we listened to those stories, and we started a survey. We were able to listen to and get some idea of the scale. So yes, you guys might well be aware, we had significant numbers of people who we were able to say, not only from Sara statistically, those numbers that are being given are very, very low, but in addition to that, what we're seeing is extremely worrying, where there's a potentially clusters here, there's the potential that there are significant things, let's just say. Now, where Sara, and Sara, I know you're championing the bit here, but this is so bloody important. All of those people who were doing their bit, there may be policies that were brought into place locally. None of those are specific to Mormonism. None of those are specific to what happens with abuse in the Mormon Church. Any abuse that plays out in a religious setting plays out in a uniquely religious way. Any abuse that happens in a Mormon religious setting happens in a very bloody Mormon way. And so we have an expert here who did have that understanding. She knows what she's talking about. Then we get this is the woman who's walking out of meetings because she's being told, well, if you're going to report, this is the woman saying, no, I'm going to report. I'm going to uphold my professional standards, and I'm going to do that. This is the woman who kept on being the pain in the ass in her word. She stepped up. She told a podcast, you know what you need to do? You need to focus on this. This woman made the changes because she was so bloody tenacious. Now, yeah, lots of people know about it. Not one person that I can tell you has been able to make this kind of difference that Sara Delaney has made. Sorry, Sara.
Whoa,
Might drop
Jane.
Sara.
Whoa. I think there was quite a few things. Well, yeah, quite a few things I wanted to say really about that discussion that we've had there. One of them is, I think a pivotal change came about because we were using real examples that we were able to give to the church. We were able to say to the church, the very first podcast that we did, that was in August 2022, when we launched our safeguarding campaign, which was to say, church, you're getting it wrong, you're letting victims down, people are being hurt, and this is what you need to do to change things. Within a day of that podcast going live, we had several people contact us wanting to talk about their experiences of abuse. We were able to use some of those examples with victims' permission to have direct discussions with church lawyers and to say, what are you doing about this man who has a conviction for child sexual offences who has attended this particular congregation? There is no risk safety plan in place. He's associating freely within the ward. What is happening? To find out that they came back to us and admitted that they didn't actually know he was in the congregation, but thank you for telling us. We're going to act on that. We're going to do something with it now. We had victims talking to us about experiences of when they'd been gone tell bishops about abuse and had kind of been told, well, you know, leave it in God's hands. Let's just leave it. So people were starting to talk a lot more about abuse. Now, we became more and more adamant that DBS checks had to be the start. It was only one small aspect of what we asked for. We wanted DBS checks. We wanted safeguarding specialists to be available in every congregation, every area of the church to support stake presidents. We wanted posters and information displayed within every chapel and every building about abuse and where to get help. And we wanted adequate training and far significantly superior training to the ridiculous cartoon video the church called training. We wanted something far better than that, because we felt victims deserved it and we felt the members deserved it and the bishops and stake presidents deserved it. So we started pushing really hard on DBS checks. Now, one of the things that I believe was pivotal in driving forward these changes being announced and brought into the church was something that Nemo can talk to in a moment, but I want to put a bit of background to it. Was a letter that was sent to every bishop in the country. And I want to give you the background to that letter. I met with my bishop and stake president, and I insisted that they didn't wait for the church to issue an instruction to undertake DBS checks, but they start doing it on a local level. And I was basically saying, this is the right thing to do. The scriptures command us not to wait to be directed in all things, but that if we see a need, we should act upon it. Take the example of the Good Samaritan. Take the example of, you know, you shouldn't wait to be commanded in all things. Let's take those scriptural commands and let's act on them in real life, and let's start doing DBS checks in this ward, in this stake, without waiting for the church to authorise it. Now, they both insisted that that wasn't possible until the church authorised it. And actually, with hindsight, I understand their reason was, you know, if we say we'll do it, then what will happen is as soon as we're released, it will stop. So we need to get it as an official policy. I'll get that. But I was so quite incensed about the vulnerability that was leaving victims at, that nobody was prepared to simply start undertaking DBS checks, that I put it in writing to my bishop, the level of concern I had about that and the risk that I felt he was at as a bishop, because he didn't know the background of anybody he might be calling to a position to work with children and youth. He didn't know the background of anybody walking in through that door who he was going to assign ministering teachers to. Mm-hmm. He didn't know any of that without background checks. And I put that all in writing to him and said, this is what my concern is. We shared that letter with our beautiful Brit Venture group and said, hey, this is what I've sent to my bishop today. You know, what else can we do to push this forward? And one of the lovely guys here, Julian, said, please do me a favour and send that letter to every bishop in the country. That was the background to how the letters went to every single bishop in the country. And then, Nemo, you had a huge, big role in that. So do you want to kind of talk about your role in that?
I'm not sure I call it a huge, big role. I essentially sat and went through the LDS meeting house finder and found the ward address of every meeting house in the UK, put it in a spreadsheet. And then we went to town sending it by post to every meeting house. And the church wasn't too happy about it. The church, in a response, tried to say, we don't know how they got your personal information. Well, we didn't get any personal information. We didn't get any private information. We just aggregated information from a publicly available source so that we could send a letter to the postal address that the church provides publicly for those bishops, which is the meeting house. So that's all we did there. I'm aware of the time. And I'm aware that this is Sara, so it's going to be a little bit of back and forth between me and Sara for a moment before I bring the rest of the panel in. I'm going to have to truncate the timeline a little bit here.
Yeah.
Because eventually what we got an announcement that the church was going to implement background checks.
Yeah.
A letter went out saying that was going to happen. Sara, real quick, what do you think finally got that over the line? Why do you think they finally made that decision?
I think the level of exposure the church was getting through not doing background checks when almost every other faith community in this country had been doing them for many, many years was actually showing the church in an absolutely appalling light. And I think they actually felt they had no choice but to go ahead with it, because I think the exposure was too great on their failings.
Okay.
And I think it was literally public scrutiny and membership scrutiny and people being aware that they weren't doing the bare minimum that almost forced them into it, in all honesty. Andrew Ford had said at the independent inquiry that the church were aware of DBS checks, knew that they could use them if they wanted to, but they actually had a system of callings and sustaining and opposing, and bishops for safeguarding leads in every area, and they felt that was sufficient.
Which that really got my goat, because the idea that the opposing vote in the church means absolutely anything at all, I feel like I've quite thoroughly debunked through my experiences personally with Down Lake Oaks. But tonight's not about me. What I would like to say is that when this came through, what we've seen in the past is with people like Sam Bishop, Sam
Young.
Bishop Young, Sam Young,
Sam
yes.
Young.
So what we see with Sam Young is that when people agitate for changes, particularly in this area, what we get from them is, thank you very much. We get this from the church. Thank you very much. Well, let's communicate you for your troubles, and then we'll implement the thing that you brought to us. That's what we see generally. Peter will tell you that you agitate too much, you get excommunicated. I can tell you, if you fly to Texas and say, hey, you might not be being completely honest with this town about the need for a steeple to be that tall, or if you go on a show and answer questions honestly about the church, or if you go on the radio and talk about the church honestly, eventually, at some point, someone will go, okay, right, enough, off you go. You know, and that's an issue that the church has, where they can't deal with critics in a way that is productive and healthy and adult. They can't just take this stuff on board. Unless your name is Sara Delaney, in which case, not only do they take it on board, not only do they hear you and do something, even when they're not legally required to, but they then decide, okay, well, we're going to start calling stake safeguarding specialists. We're going to take that recommendation on board that there's a safeguarding specialist available. Sara, would you like that calling? And that's what happened. So let's talk real quick about you getting called as a stake safeguarding specialist, the role I somehow ended up playing in that, and what that may have caused.
Yeah, I was called a safeguarding specialist by a stake president who had taken the time to build a relationship with me and had taken the time to actually find out he could trust me, because I wasn't actually going to start talking about anything that was going to cause him problems or be difficult and what have you. So I think we developed a relationship of trust, and he was very enlightened, very aware of the need for safeguarding, both professionally and as a stake president. And he asked me to serve as his safeguarding specialist. So one of the things he said to me in calling me was, you will keep us honest. He said, I'm asking you because you will keep us honest. So, you know, I mean, credit to that guy. He did a brilliant job. The day I was called and set apart, I asked Nemo to come to church and be with me, because I wanted a mate there. I wanted a friend there, somebody with me who could be there when I was being called and set apart, because this kind of felt huge to me because of the amount of work and effort that had gone into it. It felt huge, and I really wanted him to be somebody to be there with me. And then when I was being set apart, I didn't actually even say anything to Nemo, particularly before doing this. I kind of threw him on the spot with it. But I just looked at the High Counselor who was due to set me apart, and I just said, can my friend Dougie stand in the circle with me? Because that would mean a lot to me. And he said, absolutely. I think he'd been Dougie's young men's person. He knew Dougie quite well anyway. And he was very happy for Dougie to stand in the circle with me. I was set apart for that calling. And then afterwards, there were some quite difficult conversations with church leaders and lawyers about how on earth did Douglas Stilgo get to stand in this circle? How was he involved in something like this setting apart? And very, very soon after that, and I can prove no correlation, this is purely a Sara Delaney theory, it was literally within days, weeks of that Nemo was told he could not use his priesthood anymore.
Yeah.
Now, I can't claim any connection, but it's suspiciously close in time to
I
me.
mean, it may have been a feature of an article in the Salt Lake Tribune when we talked about how the background checks came about, that I was involved in
It may have
setting
been
you apart.
ABC News in America that upset people as well.
Oh yeah, I did go on ABC News,
Yeah,
didn't
it was
I?
ABC News as well. Ran an article on it, and I think that upset people.
Well,
because
then
what
we've
happened
gone
was
to-
because what was fed back to me was that the church were becoming increasingly concerned. This is by lawyers that fed back to me that the church are increasingly concerned that there's an activist narrative being attached to safeguarding. And I thought, well, it is all about activism. That's why you've got safeguarding in place, but they didn't want that narrative spoken about.
All right. So
I think
Jane, jump
it's
in real
really,
quick.
it's really significant that that we were trying to work across the Mormon spectrum. And so when, at this point, Peter's been excommunicated, Nemo's in very ropey territory. I mean, he's just, they don't really know what to do with him. I end up leaving, not right, exactly. We don't either, mates. So yeah, I'm sort of getting into the zone where I'm about to leave. All our mates are leaving, and I think not only is the church really quite worried about, hold on, what is the dissident thing here, that Sara had all of this stuff that she's already said. Sara said directly to lawyers. Sara said this. Andrew Ford was in the room when she's heard, the statistics that you're giving, this isn't right. Here's how we can do better. This was all very constructive. Here is how the LDS Church can make itself its best self. The media attention that happened then was fantastic. We praised the church right up to the hilt. We didn't talk about any undercurrents of negativity, any pushback at, the fact that Andrew Ford was pretty much ignoring any emails that Sara was sending. And we had to, we were working with another church lawyer who was much more receptive and supportive, and could do something about the concerns that Sara was bringing him. We got to a point where we were able to sort of say on social, across social media, hey, look how wonderful this is. Here's this incredible event, the first stake safeguarding specialist that's being called in the UK, being set apart with our great mate Nemo the Mormon, and the church decides to freak out instead of using it as this wonderful opportunity. And I think what that does is it highlights where Sara herself is at, because Sara wasn't in love with church at this point. One of sort of, my big concerns is, Jing, if you're being called, that's gonna pull you back to a place in a church relationship that's possibly going to take its toll on you. Not the work of the safeguarding, you can do that, in your sleep, you're very good at that, but the interaction with the church, and it really, in many ways, did take its toll. And I think that sort of brought you to today, Sara.
Okay, so before, here's how we're going to do it, right? I'm going to ask Peter in a moment to reflect on what he saw of what Sara managed to achieve as stake safeguarding specialist. I'm then going to ask Sara about the end of that calling and about where she's going now, and that's how we'll wrap up. But before we do all that, and while Peter thinks and condenses and brings these thoughts all together, I am going to ask you all to do something. If you like this video, there is a button just under it specifically for the purpose of telling me that you liked it. It also tells YouTube that you liked it, which is good for me, good for you, good for everyone, really, because it means you get more videos like this. If you want these videos consistently put in front of your eyeballs, then what you can do is you can hit the subscribe button, which will definitely make sure that you see them. And if you want me to continue doing this kind of stuff, having these kind of conversations, bringing this kind of stuff about the Mormon Church to light, then there are ways to support me beyond what I've just described. There are links in the description. You can become a channel member. You can join us on Patreon, where I'm going to start watching Mormon films and talking about them. And I do live Q&As and all sorts of fun stuff over on Patreon. You can chuck me money on Donor Box if you just want to throw shekels my way to support this work. And channel members get early access to videos, which is great fun. So any of those things would be great. Please feel free to support me in any way you would like. Peter, please tell us about what you saw of Sara's work as a stake safeguarding specialist.
There we go. Oh, sorry. Hello.
Yeah.
Overall, I'd say there are three key things that made the huge difference here in the whole journey. And in a sense, this is a model that I would encourage everyone to follow, to not feel you can't make a big institution change and reform. Because as someone said at Sunstone last weekend, as Margaret Mead said, you know, all the significant changes in history have been made by a small team of committed people. And that then resonates with, if you're onto something that's good and true, other people will eventually support it. So the first is, I would say, find allies. So what happened here is all of us in our own things. I went on the BBC with some others supporting Sam Young's campaign. Nemo's podcasting about these issues. Sara and the 21st Century Saints and Jane are doing these things. We got together. So make a team. And throughout this journey, and also supporting Nemo in a lot of his campaigns, we have had intense, regular discussions. And we have often, I think, saved each other from making a misstep, because we brainstormed, we thought it through, we brought all of our different perspectives and experiences together. And in each case, astonishing things were accomplished here, and also with how far Nemo got with taking his opposing vote up to the first presidency. I think all of these efforts would have fallen at an earlier stage if we hadn't been hive-minding it along the way. So get a team and strategize with them. The second piece of thing that's significant is, I'd say, directly to church leaders who know that there are things that need to change, and you are so locked into a culture that cannot initiate significant change from grassroots. You are waiting to be told by seniors what to do, and however much you know something's wrong, you have ingrained in you that it is not your place to say the leaders are wrong about something and we need to change it. Be that change. Sara, why would this institutional church with its culture pay any attention to me, to Nemo, to Sara, or anyone? And the two game changers on this. So number 2 is the leaders who chose to step up. All of these involved some of the church's lawyers, some of the clergy leaders engaging with us in a really positive and proactive way. I was invited because of my teaching profession to contribute to our state's safeguarding, just to feed into it, this policy, what I'd learned in my professional setting. Nemo has had church leaders who've kind of protected him and engaged with him. Sara absolutely has. And these have been crucial. So I would just say to those leaders in the LDS Church who are itching to do something and be the change, you can, because this is how this happens. Some of you did. And the third, so find your allies and strategize. Be the leader who makes the change. But thirdly, that, as we've discussed, the thing that made the difference was we were prepared to break the rules. Ultimately, they were never going to get together in a room. They ended up having a national safeguarding committee of several state presidents. That would never have happened with whatever they might tell themselves. There's no way on God's earth that would have happened without the additional pressure and publicity from outside. And that's how all reforms in the church have happened. We played that role. So be the bold activist, have the fun idea, have the slogan, have the public campaign, the petition, send the letters to the ward leaders. And I think perhaps something we haven't emphasized enough is what we were basically saying to all those ward leaders is, you have no legal protection at all if anything allegation is made against you as a bishop or a bishopric or state presidency member, because you're alone in a room with a child. What are you doing? Protect yourself. And the church has officially said you are responsible for safeguarding, not them. They're not going to have your back. And I think that certainly could and should and did put the wind up a lot of them, that helped be that change. So think of the bold, game-changing thing you can do to kind of create the momentum. And those are the things that works for nearly all activism, and I would say came together here. Perfect. But absolutely, Sara's professionalism, bringing her secular professional knowledge and being determined to use those skills and knowledge and contacts. And also building bridges with church lawyers, with church leaders, but also so many safeguarding charities and organizations. Jane and Sara have facilitated them engaging with the church and vice versa. And hopefully really positive things can continue to come from that.
Cool. So I'm going to...
Hang on, I just want to say,
all right.
So far, we've done a lot of liaison with charities. The church are not engaged with charities at the moment. We've done a lot of liaison with charities.
Yeah.
They've got a
Okay.
chance. Okay, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Sara's calling. I mean, I hate to think how many emails about safeguarding you must have on your laptop, Sara, with the amount of work you did.
Nemo, I've got over 3,000, and I only know that because I went through my Gmail accounts fairly recently because I was trying to kind of scoop everything to do with church safeguarding up into one place. And there was well over 3,000 emails relating to church safeguarding. And
So
this
you were
is
very
something else
active
the church
in
need
your
to
calling.
think about. The church need to think very, very carefully about safeguarding specialists, about bishops, stake presidents. Where are they storing all this information?
The
What are they
GDPR
doing with it?
implications could be interesting.
Yeah, where's it being stored? And nobody's ever given me any guidance from church on where I should store this and how I should control and manage this information.
Right. Well, hopefully that's something that can get addressed. But I think that shows that you are doing a lot of work in this calling, and we've talked about the progress you're making. You brought your professionalism, your experience to this calling in a way that often people don't get to do, because outside of musical callings, where you probably are some sort of skilled musician in order to play the organ on a Sunday, many callings in the church are done with the explicit idea that you do not need to be already qualified to have this calling in order for us to ask you to do this job. And what the church got with you was someone who was already extremely qualified to do this calling, doing the calling. And so you made all this progress. You brought your professional experience to that calling. You made a real difference. You did all that. And yet now you're leaving. The church is losing its last Brit Venger. The last Brit Venger is gone. Why? Why would you step away from this? That's the final question I have for you, Sara.
Right.
Why step away?
Safeguarding is something that kept me holding on to this church for many, many years. I've held on to see what difference I can make, what I can do for safeguarding. And every time I felt like leaving, every time I wanted to step away, often another victim would come forward, there'd be another conversation with a lawyer, there'd be something else happening, and I'd stay to try and resolve that. We had somebody going through court a while ago. I stayed to support that case. I stayed to support another person who's currently struggling around risks and offenders posing that they're worried about. And I kept staying for safeguarding purposes. And then I was released from my safeguarding specialist calling, which I have to say was a huge relief. It was a huge relief to be released from that calling, because I knew that until I was released, I would never be able to properly walk away from this church. I was released from the calling. I mean, I don't know why, but stake presidents changed. I mean, I kind of thought I'd be released, to be honest with you, so that's fine. There's a lot they need to look at and think about with a safeguarding specialist calling, because it sounds a fantastic calling, but actually at the end of the day, it's only processing paperwork and admin. It's not truly engaging in actual safeguarding practices. There's some good bits to it, but that's very dependent on local leadership roulette. The other reason I'm going is, first of all, the best safeguarding work that Jane and I, along with you guys, Nemo particularly, have helped us out. The best safeguarding work that Jane and I have done in this church, we haven't done at the request of the church through my safeguarding calling. We did it through pushing open a door that we weren't invited to even knock at, never mind push open and batter down and walk through. We did our best safeguarding work that's made the greatest difference for victims and the greatest difference in bringing awareness to the issue and actually focusing the church's attention on making changes without any invitation or any formal calling. So we've actually proved we don't need that to do this and to continue this work. Jane stepped away 2 years ago and still has very amicable professional conversations with a particular church lawyer when it's necessary to do so. So I kind of, once released in the safeguarding calling, felt more able to move away from the church. And for a long time, I've struggled hugely with homophobia in this church. I've struggled with the way gay people are treated, the way we're made to feel, the way there is no true belonging. I've struggled a lot with it. And Delaney jokes being called as president prophet of this church, with the ongoing safeguarding failures that we see consistently throughout the church, reported very frequently in America, not so often reported in the press in this country, but we know about them. Ongoing failure of the church to actually sit up and take responsibility for safeguarding and to say, we will stop defending ourselves as a church in court. We will pay adequate compensation for victims. We'll stop going to church and absolutely making victims' lives hell in order to preserve our reputation. We will start doing absolutely everything we can do on a voluntary basis to improve safeguarding in this church. The prophet says that there's no tolerance for abuse in this church, and yet the actions don't actually show there's no tolerance for abuse. If there's no tolerance for abuse, that means the absolute gold standard is being achieved in safeguarding, and we're far, far away from that at the moment. So there's still a lot of room for that to happen. So the safeguarding concerns are my concerns about a prophet who, way back in 1984, when he, a few months after being called to his role as an apostle, started putting together papers around what the church should be doing around the homosexual problem. And he was saying things like, actually, employers should be allowed to exclude gay people from employment if it could have any influence people. They're okay, they can work in factories and they can work as labourers, but they shouldn't be allowed to work as teachers, and they certainly shouldn't be allowed to work in the entertainment industry or anything that could influence people. He was making comments around there should be criminal sanctions for homosexual behaviour. He was talking about how church members should be activated and proactively told to defend the family in every situation possible. The irony of it being the family in the church is marriage between one man and one woman, which is absolutely ironic when you think of the polygamous history of this church, that they're now kind of hell-bent on marriage being one man and one woman. But there we are, that's where it's at. So there's been years of homophobic statements by Dallin H. Oakes, and my worry with him as president of this church is that God's prophet on this earth should have as his primary goal in making sure that everybody feels a sense of belonging, that everybody is treated equally, compassionately, lovingly, and feels a place where they belong, and a place where they stand, and a place where they're needed and they're wanted. And I don't see any evidence of Dallin H. Oakes doing that. Okay. I mean, he kind of says, oh, it's okay, society can sort of be a bit equal if you want to the gay people, but we're not going to do that in the church. And he's never rescinded any of these homophobic comments. So the worry I have is he's never, ever rescinded, disavowed, and said that he no longer believes any of the homophobic things he said about don't be seen to associate with your gay child because people might think you approve of their relationship. Don't let your gay child hang out in your home. He's never rescinded any of these. So how do we know he doesn't still believe that, and he doesn't still hold those as core values and core beliefs that will inform all the decisions and actions he takes as president of this church? And how open can he be to heaven trying to impress upon him the need for any revelation or any change for how the church interact with the gay community and gay people within this church when he holds such stringent, ardent homophobic beliefs? So I kind of struggle with him being president of the church. So among the ongoing safeguarding failures that this church still continue to push against, they still haven't got complete transparency. They still fear being honest and open about abuse. The homophobic attitudes, beliefs, and expressions that I've heard from Dallin H. Oakes for decades and decades and decades just means that I can no longer hold on to my place as a member of this church and have any integrity. The integrity and the personal value base that I hold just does not match with this church anymore. And being a member of a church where my integrity is challenged, it just means I just can't do it anymore. And this has been my home, my tribe, my community. I've taught early morning seminary for nearly a decade. I've been Relief Society president 3 times. I've done every which thing in this church it's possible to do. But no, I just can't do it anymore. The church needs to wake up to homophobia, safeguarding, but I can't do it anymore.
Okay. Well, I think I speak for all of the panel when I say that we are proud to have worked with you and we will continue working with you. And I think you should be proud of the changes that you have brought about and the things that you've done. And when the time is right for you to step away, the time is right for you to step away. And I think that decision should be honoured. And hopefully it will be when you try and make that decision, and they won't try and push you before you have a chance to walk away yourself. We will keep everyone updated if anything like that does happen, but I doubt it. I hope it's all smooth. But the final thing to say is thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Thank you very much, everyone, for all your support. And I will see you on the next video. So take care. Have a good evening. And YouTube will probably think you'll like this one. So yeah, bye now.